We are in James 1, and we're going to pick up with verse 5 and look at that through verse 8 to begin our discussion. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But he must ask in faith without any doubting, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. What do we think about that?
Well, it goes back to something that Jesus said. They don't like lukewarm.
Okay.
So we need to have faith and be strong, not be like the wave of the sea blown and tossed.
I guess lukewarm is a mixture of warm and cold, and you end up with lukewarm, and it's not palatable, really. It's not what you want to drink. May have some other uses, but it's not what you want to consume. And here it's a mixture of doubt and belief. It's a little bit of both. So you have faith without any doubting is what is desired. So if faith has some doubting, it's not exactly what God's looking for. So
I like the fifth verse.
the fifth verse?
The fifth, where it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. I use that verse quite often. So, I mean, because there are a lot of questions, a lot of things that, come up and whatever, and the wisdom of God is certainly much more accurate. It's accurate. Where a man's wisdom, myself included, is not necessarily accurate.
That's not what Karen tells me. She says your wisdom is flawless. You've never made a mistake. Okay. She's buttering you up for something, I think. She wants to go to Aruba. Wisdom is an interesting concept, and the instruction on it is to seek it directly from God through prayer. And, the Bible contains some wisdom literature. I think sometimes we conflate, if you will, the idea of knowledge and wisdom, that they're the same thing. And Dolores is shaking her head, thinking that's a really unwise thing to do, is to conflate wisdom and knowledge. And I think a lot of times this is maybe I'm getting a little revealing my innate sexism here. I think men strive for knowledge. Men strive for technical accomplishment, skill, if you will, information we want to know. And I think women just kind of naturally have wisdom. And the two meet, and that's, I think, the source of some strain, and particularly early on in marriage, is that sometimes you try to, as a husband, you try to explain things, you mansplain to her something, and but she sees kind of the bigger picture and just kind of innately knows the better course of action based on wisdom. And that's maybe why we are brought together. But sometimes our thirst for knowledge blinds us to any desire for wisdom. And
wisdom would be the correct use of knowledge.
To some extent, yes, and to a large extent.
I mean, we may know something, but how we use that would be the wisdom side of the equation, so to speak. Because sometimes having knowledge and using it is not necessarily the best thing to do.
Or as the old saying, knowledge, it tells you that a tomato is a fruit rather than a vegetable. Wisdom is not putting tomato in your fruit salad. You know, so that's
There you go.
I mean,
Well, see,
botanically, if you want to get precise about it, botanically, tomatoes are fruits. Culinarily, in food, and it's a vegetable. So that's how it works. So in different
I'm glad
contexts,
you're
but
sweet.
yeah, for all you science nerds out there and online, hi Robin. I'm sure you're not a nerd. I'm sure you're just wise, and so I'm not calling you names.
She knows where to put it.
Yeah, she doesn't put the tomatoes in the fruit salad.
She doesn't.
So when
If Connie does it, it probably works fine. It's probably delicious. So it's.
so when I'm saying my prayers in the morning, I'm asking the Lord to help me to know what He wants me to do. That's asking for knowledge. Then it's not asking for wisdom.
Well, I think bringing wisdom and knowledge together, I think maybe we could call that the spiritual practice of discernment.
Because I'm not always sure that I know exactly what I need to be doing.
Well, what we should be doing, and a lot of times, the different kind of guiding principles may come into conflict with each other in trying to actually live out our life, not because the principles themselves are wrong, but just life gets complicated sometimes, and complicated by ourselves and by the world, a very broken world. So it can be difficult to know exactly what the priority is. And so you get this encouragement from James to seek wisdom from God rather than he doesn't say, go back and read your Bible more. Of course, they didn't. He's still writing one of the books of the Bible at this point, so they don't have all of it yet. But they may have had some of they may have had the Gospel of Mark already. They may have had maybe another gospel. They may have had some other letters. And they certainly had what we call the Old Testament. And so and there's a lot of wisdom in the Old Testament, and there's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot about the story, the narrative. When we read the narrative in the Old Testament, we read the history of the people, the story, that's really information, isn't it? It's, they went here, then they went there, and this guy touched the ark and got shocked and died, and all, that's knowledge. But then we read the laws, and we read sometimes the commentary by people of the time on what it means to live under the laws, and you start trying to understand the wisdom of the people. The laws themselves, I guess, are also knowledge, they're information, but why they say what they say and what it actually means when put into practice can be an exercise in developing wisdom. And of course, when we think about wisdom, Solomon, I think, is the guy who kind of pops into our minds because he himself asked God for wisdom, didn't he? I think if he was really wise, he probably wouldn't have married so many women. I mean, that's, every wife comes with a mother-in-law, Solomon. I don't know if you knew that or not, but that's a joke. I have a wonderful mother-in-law, so I'm very blessed in that. And a good wife, a wonderful wife, and a wonderful mother-in-law. I got lucky on that. So, yeah. So, yes, ma'am.
Another example of wisdom is that we can tell our friend by his examples of what he's doing that he's not going to make it to heaven. But wisdom tells you don't start off with that statement, you're going to hell, because you've been alienated in them. And so that's where you can pray for the wisdom. How do I address this person? I have the knowledge that he needs to repent. How do I go about it? And that would be the wisdom.
Mm-hmm. I think the knowledge is knowing that we are called to give an answer for our faith, and then the wisdom is knowing when and how. Again, rightly, to a large extent, what do we lead with? And I've kind of gone back to this before, and when we talk about our monthly sermons on evangelism. But Paul's sermon at Mars Hill, Paul has a whole lot of knowledge, doesn't he? I mean, he is a very educated scholar in the Jewish faith. And yet when he preaches to a bunch of pagans who don't know anything about that, he doesn't try to wow them with all of his knowledge about specific people in the Old Testament or anything like that. He speaks of God as the God in whom we live and move and exist. Very broad, sweeping terms. And God certainly is all those things. And the Old Testament figures would have accepted that and understood that too. It's not a controversial take, and it's not even really a simple or simplistic take. I mean, that's what that means is a big deal too, isn't it? It can take a lifetime of work to understand that. But it's the terms themselves are broad enough that they are accessible at a lot of different levels. So that's Paul using wisdom. He could have shown his knowledge and got up there and started talking about Hezekiah like I did Sunday morning. In my exercise of wisdom, and I don't know how wise it was, I felt like before I tell even this group about Hezekiah, since I've been here for 3 years now, and we haven't talked really about any of the kings, so it's been a while at least since y'all have heard any of the stories of the kings, I thought I needed to give a little primer about the monarchy, the Jewish monarchy, and knowing that some of y'all, I'm guessing in 40 years, Darius covered some of that at some point, and probably did it very well, maybe better than I could have ever done it. But it may have been a while. And then we have people in here now that never heard Darius. So it is the wisdom in terms of reaching other people. I think a good example of kind of what Thelma is saying, and I've used this before, but you find out your neighbor next door has filed bankruptcy, and you know he's a compulsive gambler. I mean, do you go over there and he's not a Christian? He's not a person of faith. Is your first message, this is what you get for gambling all the time. You're going to lose your house, your car, your marriage on it because you went gambling too much. He probably kind of has already figured that out. And maybe the gambling is the result of something deeper than just making poor moral choices at that point. You know, he may be just under the spell like any other addict. He's now a slave to that sin. It just drives him. And maybe at that point it's time for some compassion and, what can we do to help and all of that. And then maybe talk about, but then again, maybe it's not time to, okay, how much do you need? Maybe that's not the time to bring that up either. It is, life is difficult, and James has a lot of practical information, and in that sense, it is wisdom. But even in employing that, especially trying to take it from the culture to which James is writing this letter and putting it into our culture. And that's where I think sometimes we have, especially some of our preachers who have, kind of historically been really knowledgeable, may have lacked a little bit in wisdom. And when I hear someone say things like, we should, bring back Old Testament justice. Well, when we get back into Exodus, we'll see what you think about that. Okay. Well, not that Old Testament. You might say, well, we're not that, but this, well, that's not how the law of Moses worked, was it? You didn't say, well, we'll take this part of it we like and we'll ignore this other part of it. That's not really how it was supposed to work. So we need to grow and be able to use our knowledge better. We do need to grow in knowledge. There's nothing wrong with acquiring more knowledge, but we need to know how to use it, and we need to know when to use it too. I think sometimes you sound really wise when you sit there and keep your mouth shut too, don't you? I mean, that can be a really a move that.
Better to have them think you a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt.
And I think, coming out of the election season, we talk about unstable minds, unstable men and women, unstable, lacking in knowledge, lacking in wisdom. Just look at our political landscape these days. I think you see that abounding. So,
Unfortunately, started the next cycle.
we get the leadership we deserve, not the one we need. So, Anyway, let's see. It is, though, it's accessible. This wisdom, as Mark pointed out, it's something we seek through prayer, and we're told we will receive it, aren't we? I mean, that's the thing. We are told we will receive it. Does that mean we're always going to implement it? We're always going to use it? It's still, there's this battle between, okay, I know I should do this, but this is really what I want to do. And frequently what we want to do kind of wins out. So anyway.
The last half of that, it shows the consequences of our doubt. We don't need to expect anything from them if we're doubting. So, we gotta really keep our mind where it belongs.
But if we're foolish enough not to believe the promise that we will receive wisdom, then we won't receive wisdom. So it's I don't. Do we have any people here from Missouri originally? I don't want to. The show me state. You got to show them before they'll believe it. They got to see it to believe it. But as people of faith, we see it because we believe it, don't we? We believe, and then we sometimes see. So if we don't believe, we won't see. So and it puts us at odds with the world. I mean, more than anything, God's wisdom is so different than human wisdom. And I think that's where getting too hung up on things like politics, there's a famous quote, if you give all of your hopes and aspirations to a politician, you are giving Caesar what really belongs to God. I mean, your hopes should be with God. And no matter who's in whatever office, who has power or whatever, God is the ultimate power. That person will have to answer for his choices or her choices, and we will have to answer to ours. And the lack of godly wisdom in the world, which is, I believe, running amok right now. When I see some of the stuff that I could never have imagined would be going on in and around amongst children, that it's doing that right now. Adults have always been weird. They used to try to keep it away from the kids. Now it's bring the kids in, it seems like. We started out bringing our daughters to work, which I think is fine. And then we bring our kids into other things that the kids aren't really. It'd be great if they never found out about it, but we're going to make sure they do right off the bat. It's unwise. And it's a worldly wisdom that says they need to hear about this, they need to know about this, they need to be involved in this. That is a worldly, at best, I think it's worldly foolishness, but at best it's worldly wisdom. And it's not the wisdom of God, which is to train your children to be faithful servants of God. Train them, give them knowledge, give them an opportunity to grow, and be a model of faithful living in front of them. Not that any parent is perfect, but some of them on some of these social issues, when they start bringing their kids in, I'm like, well, what's the rest of the country really supposed to do? If you're going to do this to your kids as the parents, what can the schools do? What can the churches do? What can just neighbors do? What can we do? I mean, not much. I mean, it's just like, sorry, kid. I think they should have a right to sue their parents when they turn 18, and they can blame them for all their problems. I don't like people who blame their parents for their problems, but the parents I knew growing up didn't do the stuff that a lot of parents are doing today with their kids. So they at least had better sense than that. So it's not having kids, I can be an expert on rearing children. So I haven't had one kid yet show me that I don't know exactly what I'm talking about in parenting. It kind of all changes once you start having kids, doesn't it, Connie? When you have to put your knowledge into practice there, you got to have a little parental wisdom. Okay, getting off that high horse and that soapbox. Verses 9 through 11. But the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position, And the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and its flower falls off, and the beauty and of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man, in the midst of his pursuits, will fade away. In the midst of buying Twitter, the rich man will. He's not the only rich man out there that's in the middle of his own pursuits, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, that those verses say to me, it doesn't make any difference. Whether you're rich, poor, or anything, your life is going to fade away just like all men's life. And what you make of it here is where you're going to end up there, so to speak. I don't know. I look at my life as well as others around it, and I've been very fortunate. I had great parents to start with, and avoided a lot of traps and whatnot down the road. I had plenty to live on.
And a good horse to ride.
Yes, in a way.
And a good horse to ride.
And a good horse to ride, right? So, and I look at those things and
Not everybody has just the basics. Not everybody has
Right.
even decent parents starting out sometimes. And it's really, we've seen it sadly in this congregation, with the effects beyond poor parenting can have on a young life, and how even the best of attentions and efforts to try to make up for that, there's only so much you can do, a lot of times. So it's very sad. But again, to quote an old saying, I guess that's the mode today. After the game, the king and the pawn go back in the same box. So you may have a big state funeral and all that, and people from all over the world fly in to see your casket and all that. You're still going right in that dirt when it's all said and done. And ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So does it really matter that much if you're buried in Arlington National Cemetery or in a pauper's service? I mean, really, it matters maybe to people who care about you, but it doesn't really matter. We don't get a lot of complaints out of either group, do we? They don't say much. So it's the death is the outcome for our earthly lives. So yes, sir.
Well, as people have said before, the funeral and the burial and stuff is for the living, not for the dead. It's for the family and friends and stuff. So.
And it tells the community that this person was loved. So it's not a bad thing. I'm not trying to shut down Tammy's brother's business or anything like that. But it's also something that it's a kind of the same reality, isn't it? Whatever financial status you acquire, whatever fame and fortune and earthly success, however you measure that is acquired, you don't take it with you. You tear down your barns, you build bigger barns, and your soul is required from you that night. And again, the pull from the story, I think we can pull from this passage, first of all, the Beatitudes. Blessed are, the poor man is to exalt, is to glory in his high position, and the rich man is to weep for his humiliation, or glory, I guess, in his humiliation. But kind of the contrary way of thinking about things that Jesus gives us, contrary to the mainstream thought. Blessed are the poor. Woe to the rich. So you have that, but you also have just the overall ethic teaching that maybe the story of the rich man and Lazarus gives us, which is what you have in this life is not at all reflective of, or not necessarily reflective of what awaits you on the other side. And that's a very, very different message than most of the Old Testament, isn't it? We don't read the stories of the paupers, the poor little widows giving their 2 little mites at the temple and stuff. We don't read though. We read about the rich, powerful men. So, in a sense, one of the big differences between the Old Testament and the New Testament is this call to not be defined by earthly wealth, because we talked about last week slavery being kind of the human default. If you look throughout human history, most cultures had some form of slavery at some point. Well, one thing that still persists is in most cultures, it's better to be rich than poor, isn't it? You have a higher quality of life. You eat better, you dress better, you live better. You might think, well, God loves the wealthy people. Look how much he's blessed them. I say God loves poor people because look how many of them he made. He filled the world with them, didn't he? American poor people, some of them are real poverty. You can go to places in America and see real abject poverty. You can probably find it in Walla Walla without looking too hard. You go to other developing countries and you go right outside the airport or right outside the next block over from the tourist areas, and with that comes a lot of problems, and a lot of times violence, and it's not really safe to go to those places. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go to them. You might get killed. Well, that's part of our faith, isn't it? We do things that might get us killed. So it is a message that challenges the earthly precept that really kind of I think the more plain, if implied, but plain message of the Old Testament, which is God rewards his faithful children. Because his faithful children are Abraham, enormous wealth, Isaac, wealth, Jacob, wealth, all the 12 brothers, wealthy. And then Jesus comes in and shows us a very different way. The Son of Man doesn't have a home. The Son of Man, he ends up maybe having one set of clothes at the end of his life, and he gets a bunch of pagans fighting over it. So things are a little bit different. We should see the world differently through Christ. We should see the Old Testament differently. And one of the problems with the prosperity gospel is it's look at the Old Testament from Old Testament eyes. Looking at it exactly kind of how they saw it. You're ignoring the cross when you do that. So we are called to believe in, again, seek what we have not seen, but we believe it and we will see it. And in some ways we do see it because we believe in it. So any other thoughts on that passage? 9 through 11 there. Okay. Let's look at 12 through 18. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. What do we think about that?
Well, verse 13, when tempted, no one should say God is tempting you.
Okay.
Huh? No, not the one doing tempting. He also, we read that he will provide a way of escape.
Again, you kind of look back at the Old Testament and see some stories where it looks like maybe God did tempt people. I mean, the story of Job. He allowed it, certainly. He didn't maybe inflict it, but he didn't prevent it either, did he? And then I think a little more difficult passage, the more difficult story is the story of Abraham being called to sacrifice his son Isaac. And God doesn't tempt with evil. What is child sacrifice?
Well, he says it's not something that he wants.
Yeah.
You know, that he was against it.
Mm-hmm. And yet he sacrificed his.
Yeah, he's told Abraham to go,
He,
sacrifice his son. That's a little tough to understand.
and he said God sacrificed his own son. The father sacrificed his son. So maybe that's why he's so against child sacrifices, because it's something that he knows the significance of it. And there was one case where, in case of emergency, but everybody else does it. And I don't want to get too political again, but hi, Mindy. Good to see you there. I don't think child sacrifice is always an elaborate religious ceremony. I think it can be something much more pragmatic that brings about the intentional loss of a child's life. So I saw something today, a lawyer in Texas. I'm sorry to say he was from Texas, Dolores, but it happened in Texas evidently. He slipped the abortion pill into his wife's drink because he didn't want her to have a baby. And it's a big state. There's good and bad in every state. It's not like something like that wouldn't happen anywhere, but this story I saw was from Texas. It's very sad.
Yeah, when you were talking about Abraham's and Isaac, and God asked him to sacrifice his son. Actually, if you think about it a little bit, maybe I'm way off the track, but if you think about it a little bit, Abraham already had in his mind that he was going to kill his son. And yet God stopped him and basically raised him back up, and that would be some kind of a
Symbolic.
thank you, of Christ and on the cross.
Mhm.
He sacrificed
Very much.
and raised again. Basically, like I say, I just got to, when you mentioned that, it just kind of hit me that basically Abraham had already figured that Isaac was gone.
Yes.
I mean, I'm going to stick a knife in him and sacrifice him, and he thinking that Christ, or God, I won't say Christ, God would raise him up again. So it's pretty symbolic of the Father and the Son and his sacrifice.
Is it too much to read in that Abraham, even though he knew he was about to take his son's life, that God was going to raise him back up, and so he was doing what he was told, but at the same time he knew that there was a solution to it. That it wasn't like he was going to take him forever. That somehow God was going to fix it.
Well, what did Isaac kept asking him? Where's the ram? Where's the sacrifice? The Lord will provide. The Lord had provided Isaac, hasn't he? That's the story of Abraham and Sarah, is that Isaac is a miracle. He's a child of faith rather than a child of flesh, which is what Ishmael is. So Isaac, as this child of faith, has been provided by the Lord. The Lord provides. That is, I think, for daily living in America, 21st century, people of faith, that is a mantra we can repeat all the time. The Lord will provide. And maybe we need to repeat it more often. Every time you maybe check your 401k or whatever right now, you may want to say, the Lord will provide.
Come on.
The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Somebody was talking about the price of turkeys this year has gone up substantially over years, and the turkeys are saying, well, that's just kind of what we're worth, come on now. But it is something, it is a mantra by which we will live, and there's sustains us and encourages us when things don't look all that good. And I guess eventually you end up with the difference, and maybe it's a very slight difference between being tried and being tempted. And I guess, being tried almost is being given the opportunity to obey or to display your faithfulness, and being tempted is being given the opportunity to sin. And so what would Abraham's opportunity be? He was given the opportunity to obey. Pharaoh was given the opportunity to obey, right? We studying Exodus. Pharaoh was not told to do something that was sinful. Pharaoh was repeatedly given the opportunity to obey. And he failed his trial. So, kind of maybe that's another way of understanding the difference. And, how do you understand? I guess that's in the handout. I have that question. How do you understand the difference between trials and temptations? We even sing the song, have we trials and temptations? So what's the difference between a trial and a temptation? Well, we'll close on that this morning. Part because my allergies just kicked in. What's the difference?
Verse 15. It's us. Temptation is when we are wanting something we shouldn't be wanting. And like he was talking about Abraham knew that God would provide. One way or another, there was a promise that God had made. And he could base it on that okay, if you want me to sacrifice him, I will, because I know you will accomplish what you set out to. And the temptation is when you want something you shouldn't be wanting.
Okay. The temptation, I think, is in James' talk, is rooted within. And the trial is from without.
And that's an important thing, because a temptation for me may not be a temptation for you. We're all, we're obviously all so different that I may be tempted by something that you're not tempted by. And we have to be careful about that, because sometimes we'll communicate that to the person that's being tempted by something. How in the world is that? How can you be tempted by that? That's so this or that, and why are you being tempted by that? Well, because they are. They're different than you are. They've got different life, and so.
And to kind of tie it back to the first part of what we studied today, which is wisdom, sometimes our lives, and we look back and we see what our weaknesses and our strengths are, and sometimes we've endured trials and temptations, and we've come through them on the other side, and we're now equipped to help people who are facing similar trials and temptations. Other times we come out of it knowing, and this is wisdom, I can't be there and do that. I can't be in that environment. The old TV show Cheers, the main owner of the bar and bartender, Sam, is a recovering alcoholic. I don't think any recovering alcoholic should aspire to be a bartender. I don't think that's a good idea at all. I don't know how they got away with it then, and I don't think they would make that show today like that. But at the same time, recovering addicts who are well along in their way of recovery, can frequently be a source of encouragement and wisdom and strength to people who are behind them in their walk of recovery, who are just starting on their walk of recovery.
Well, you make
So-
a good point. It depends upon where they are
It depends on a lot of factors.
on their battle, because they may not be far enough along. It may be they need to send someone else to say, you know, they're aware of the situation and they know this other person needs help, but they're not where they need to be to go help them yet. And so they need to have to find someone else.
So that's the use of wisdom. And I mean, the recovering addict may have a lot of knowledge, but is it wise for him to get involved with this particular person and their struggle? So, and there's other cases, and I thought that one's kind of relatively sanitary and a good one to end on. So, okay, thank you for your attention and comments. And Mr. Mark King Cole will lead us in a closing prayer.